Assalamu alaikum. You're watching Views in News and I'm Faisal Rehman live from our Islamabad studios. Today, we'll be talking about a couple of very important developments and also about the ongoing tussle between China and the United States of America. Talking about the trade war or the foreign policy war. Now, as we all know, that the exports of China are the largest to United States of America, worth around $540 billion estimated in 2018. Now, since there are a lot of tariffs imposed, new sanctions, not sanctions, but in a way, more taxes, let's put it this way, and resulting in a high value of those imported products from the Chinese to USA, whereas, the bilateral trade is pretty high as well. But having said that, the regional countries might look for some sort of a market share regarding that. When you talk about another very important issue that is also related to it, that is about the China-Iran cooperation. As we all know that when the Iranian President, Mr. Rouhani, visited China and met Mr. Xi Jinping, a lot of issues came under discussion about the security of the region, about the oil prices, about the exports, about the imports. Just to give you an idea that Pakistan being the neighbor of Iran, well, since there are a lot of sanctions imposed, so a lot of barter trade is going on, but still looking at the overall trade volume, that is not that encouraging. But just to give you an example, that in 2018, the bilateral trade was estimated around $35 billion, which was actually up to 45. This was 35 in 2000, it was around 45 a few years ago as well. And the potential is so huge that the Chinese and the Iranians really want to take it up to $600 billion. Obviously, when you talk about the oil imports, talk about the energy exports from Iran, or you talk about the precious metals for that matter, and from China regarding the defense equipment, and even by regarding the HY-1, I guess that's a missile system for the for these ships. It's an anti-ship missile system given to the Chinese, and upgradation also in various fields. So it's a very important strategic partner of China. But when you look at the Chinese Middle Eastern policy, obviously, again, situation is more or less like Pakistan there. Because when you talk about supporting Iran or certain other countries, whether you support them through the diplomatic means or otherwise, there is a big question mark regarding the G6 countries. When they say that the interest of the Chinese are there in Saudi Arabia and elsewhere in the Middle East, obviously, there has to be a balance, and that is something which is very important for the Chinese. And I think they also know this, and since they've learned this art of diplomacy, how to have a proper equilibrium regarding this. How is it going to affect the Chinese or the Iranians or the Middle Eastern policy for that matter, and the ongoing problem between the United States of America and China? That is again another problem. But is it the right approach adopted by the Americans for more tariffs on the imports, or there are certain other issues related to it? Will they affect the overall fiscal issues regarding that particular area? We'll be talking about that in detail in our today's program. Let me introduce you to our panelists we have with us in our studio. On my right is Dr. Professor Rifat Hussain Saab, Senior Strategic Analyst and International Relations Expert. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
And we have with us Waqar Bukhari Saab. He's also a Senior Foreign Affairs Expert and a Senior Analyst also, sir. Thank you very much. And we have with us Air Vice Marshal Retired Faisal Saab. He's a Senior Analyst and also the Vice Chancellor of Air University, Islamabad. Sir, thank you very much. Rifat sir, first of all, sir, see, straightforward question is about China and Iran engaging very positively at one answer. China having issues regarding trade war, whether you call it a diplomatic war or a trade war or something of that sort, where Americans are really considering Chinese as an adversary, sir. And vice versa. The other side is also looking at America from the same perspective. But sir, having said that, now, since Chinese, they have occupied a lot of market share in America, they're the largest exporters to the United States of America. Do you think, sir, in the long run, by adopting these policies, do you think the American think tanks or the policymakers are adopting the right approach, sir? or do you believe that things would have been taken care of otherwise also?
Well, Faisal, thank you so much. I think the first thing that you have to keep in mind is that who is the aggressor in this so-called China-Sino-American trade war. I wouldn't call it a trade war, but it's a tariff war essentially, in which the Americans have decided to impose tariffs on the Chinese exports gradually from 10 to 25%, and they have targeted $200 billion of US imports from China, and they have imposed tariffs. But again, this was the action that was initiated about a year ago when Trump announced that China was engaging in unfair trade practices, and they were involved in the theft of so-called theft of intellectual property rights, and they were pursuing an aggressive foreign policy agenda which was not acceptable to the Americans. So in order to bring China to a heel, they launched this aggressive tariff imports. Now, Chinese waited for another 3 or 4 months, whereby they were hoping that the Sino-American trade war or the tariff war will not escalate. But unfortunately, the Trump administration, it continued to pursue its agenda aggressively against the Chinese. So much so that in the last G20 summit, there was an expectation that when Trump would meet the Chinese President Xi Jinping, so they will be able to cut a deal and they will advise caution, and there is going to be a slowdown in case in terms of the American pursuit of tariff policies against Chinese goods. But there were certain promises that were made, and after the immediately 2 weeks after the summit finished, then the Americans began to reevaluate their policies, and they are now threatening to cover all Chinese exports to the Americans, which also include roughly about $350 billion of consumer goods. So once that step is taken by the US government, then I think it will force the Chinese to retaliate. But the whole point is that the Chinese are not willing to seek a rupture of their relationship, and the worst affected, that's the most interesting aspect, is that the worst affected are going to be the US companies who are doing business inside China, and they will be looking for opportunities to take their business somewhere else. And Mexico and India and Vietnam are being mentioned as the alternative hubs for these. Correct. So, in other words, because the whole American game is that the tariff war between the two countries, if it continues unabated, and there is no regulatory framework that gets put in place, so this will literally make the American exports so expensive if they are going to import these items from China, so they have to look somewhere else. So the American companies, multinational companies, there are about 500 of them. They are operating in various sectors of the Chinese economy, and they are taking advantage of the cheap labor, and there are many other concessions that the Chinese government has given to them.
Americans, Dr. Saab, believe that because of the American trade, Chinese are having additional 900,000 jobs. So you can well imagine that's a huge number.
So then, the worst sufferer in case of the escalation of this terror war are going to be the American consumers, because most of the American retails, most of the they are used to buying Chinese imports. If you go to the Safe Mart or
anywhere,
or anywhere, or Walmart, and you name it, Target, so they are full of Chinese goods, because the Chinese goods are relatively cheaper. So they will be the worst, they will be the hardest hit. So the Chinese do not want this tit for tat retaliation, but if the American if the Trump administration persists with this aggressive attitude, then the Chinese will be left with no alternative but to impose retaliatory
Measures.
non-tariff barriers on the import of their imports from the
Now
from
you
the
talk about
United States.
machinery, you talk about $60 billion worth of services
Yes.
were exported from USA to China. So just imagine, I mean, look at the volume, look at the overall size of the business and the trade. Now, sir, another very important factor, Bukhari Saab, is about the relation between China and Iran. Iran is an observer state, sir, but most likely, since they have become strategic partner of the Chinese, they might end up not in the recent future, sir, but maybe at some stage, they will be given the status of the proper member. Currently, there are observing states, 4 of them. I think that's Iran, that's Mongolia, and 2 more countries. But having said that, sir, the expansion could be huge because they want to include Turkey, the Chinese, and even for CPEC. So Iran will be a very important trading partner. Sir, at some stage now, the relationship between Indians and the Iranians, that's really good. I mean, I would say, look at the kind of trade which is currently going on. But Indians, they had to step back because of the American pressure. On the other hand, sir, Iran its geostrategic location is also very, very important. So when you look at it, sir, from that perspective, that Chinese are gaining ground inside Iran wherever Americans used to. So do you think, I mean, now Iranians are also shifting into their camps, sir, and slowly but surely things would be very different. If Iran becomes a strategic partner of China, CPEC would be a great deal from Pakistan all the way, and then this old formula, if you remember, that Pakistan wanted Iran and Turkey to be a part of the deal, sir. So this could be amazing, and this could also create a balance which is going to be in our favor, sir.
Well, I'll answer that question, but before
Please.
that, I want to add some spice to the discussion. What are Chinese? I think America has been taken by surprise by Chinese because in 1977, Chinese came to an international conference in Pakistan and they told us that now they have tap water in their houses in 1977. In 1996, Pakistan, then they sold A5 to us, which were called flying coffins. Many of our young
jet.
pilots.
Who would know better than
Yes.
AVM Saab?
Because the ejection seat was defective anyway. Then in 1996, Pakistan bought an electronic scoreboard from China for the Jinnah Sports Complex. That was bought for 50 million rupees. And then it went out of order, and then Chinese came, they took 7 million rupees, repaired it, and it went out of order again. At that time, I was chairman of electronics department, Peshawar University. So I just went there, I asked them to show me the inside of the scoreboard. And what I saw was ridiculous, ridiculous simply. In 1997, their technology was ridiculous. I came back and I asked my student to build a scoreboard, small one. And then in 1998, Pakistan entered into a deal with China for 225 million rupees for some equipment, electronic scoreboard, video screen, etc. At that time, I was ready. So I went to the press and I started shouting that we can buy it for 20 million. Well, I and Chinese ambassador he used to go and I used to go to this and that, and then he met Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif, and a deal for 130 million was finalized. I saved 90 million by making this. Then Nawaz Sharif Saab told the Chief Minister NWFP Mehtab Basit Saab that this professor is creating problems, so do something. So he asked me, he called me and asked me that, can you make a scoreboard for us? We are going to have 27th National Games in Peshawar. And I said yes. He said, how much will it cost? I said 1.5 million. Against 50 million. because we had made the calculations. And then they delayed the check, and I was left with 44 days. It was a student project for us, 2 young lecturers and 10 students, and we completed it in 44 days. And then Nawaz Sharif came there, and then I was removed from my service and whatever. Anyway, that is another story. But what I want to say is that Chinese overtook us in technology. I think we were better than them. And the Chinese overtook the entire world in their technology. What they did, they used to sell very, very defective things. I don't know what system they had. They encouraged their workers, their technologists, their engineers, and their traders. So this, giving you this background, I think that America was taken by surprise. They never expected that China will become such a great exporter to America. And I don't know what happened.
Even now they are surprised, and they'll be further surprised in the future.
Yes, yes. And now America, there's a great trade deficit between America and China, you know. And now they are trying to take corrective measures. As far as Iran is concerned, China is a very, we say in Urdu, misna. I mean, I don't know how you translate it in English. China has been doing all these things. Russia tried to go to the warm waters by aggression. China has almost reached the warm water without any aggression. And their policy is such that they will very comfortably control the entire Gulf region. Iran, of course, Iran cannot go elsewhere. I think that American policy is a great, very foolish policy in all the regions here. America has offended Iran just for nothing, only because America wants that Iran and Saudi Arab should be in tension so that America can sell its arms and ammunition to Saudi Arab. For this purpose, it has pushed Iran away from it. So naturally, China will take over. The rest is, we have got a very learned people here.
No. Another very important factor, for example, AVM Saab, when we talk about the Chinese energy security, we do understand that a lot of import is taking place from Iran, sir. And then you also talk about how can Iran sort of benefit from this escalation between the two countries, sir. Its implications on the Chinese foreign policy and on trade policy. Let's throw light on that side, sir.
In a more peaceful world, there would be a lot of oil and gas flowing from Iran to China via Pakistan. That is a given. So that now when you look at the Iran's importance in Chinese foreign policy, Iran has invested almost over $8.5 billion over the years in Iranian infrastructure.
The Chinese?
The Chinese have invested in Iran, in the Iranian infrastructure. So, and if you
railway, hospitals, and
everything. So so that means that as USA was driving the Iranian economy to negative, the Chinese were investing in Iranian,
very cautiously
investing in the
slowly but surely,
Iranian economy. Now, when you look at 2013, when the CPEC was announced, China made a statement that Middle East is its neighboring region. And that was probably in the third Communist Party's third conference that they announced Middle East as neighboring region. It means that if you have concentric circles around China, then probably Afghanistan, Pakistan, and Iran come in the central circle, and the adjoining circle has Middle East placed over there. So that is the importance of this region, because there's not only the strategic access to Gwadar, to warm waters through Gwadar, but if you look at China is the largest importer of oil from Iran. So that's another way they have been supporting the Iranian economy and supporting their own economy as well as far as the energy is concerned. China also became a major importer of oil from Saudi Arabia and from Persian Gulf. So the almost 60% of Chinese oil is flowing through the Persian Gulf. So that is the importance of Chinese, Iran, the Middle East, Iran, and the region to China. If you look at the Chinese history, there have been three clear, distinct eras.
Yeah.
The era of till about 1978, the Mao Zedong era, the world was defined by either your relationship with America, the capitalist bloc, or the Soviet bloc, or the socialist bloc. So the world was very clear, very innocent in defining their own spaces. 1978 onwards, the Chinese interest in the Middle East was primarily based on the national interests of each other, and they did not, because there was already American influence there and partially the Russians were there, so Chinese did not have a space to move into the Middle East. 1993, China became the net importer of oil. That was the time that their economy started to pick up and they needed more oil. And that is the time that China actually went on offensive in its relationship with the Middle East and also its economic and trade relationship with the Middle East. So that these are three different, very different, and from 2007 onwards, you have seen that China is increasingly involved in the
They're capitalizing now on the previous investments.
So if you see that China has now very gradually become a major player in the politics of the region, in the Middle East and Iran and Afghanistan and
Undoubtedly
Pakistan.
one of the heavyweights. Yeah?
So that is the way. And now if you look at the US confrontation with Iran, the gain probably the gainers are Moscow and Beijing. It's helping Beijing to increase its influence, though Beijing was forced to decrease its oil imports almost to probably to less than 10%, but their relationship with Iran has not that much impacted, because Iran also realizes the impact of this American sanctions on the companies that deal with Iran, because if they have to deal in US currency, it has to be through the US banking system, financial system.
And there is a ban on that also.
But the greater cooperation probably between the two countries, Iran and China, is in Afghanistan, where both have common interests, and China probably has now increasingly higher economic interest in Afghanistan, and they find a very responsive partner in Iran in that particular area. So I think in coming years what we see is that and the major, if you look at the major influence or major difference between the American policies and the Chinese policies, I think of one major factor. China has a president who has been nominated president for the life,
Xi Jinping.
Xi Jinping. And USA has a president that has a short life of 4 years. And he has to go back to his people, change his policies to suit the genius of his people, not the real politic, but the genius of his people to win the next election. Whereas the Chinese policies look at long-term plan, and that is what gives the stability, the economic stability, the strategic
Consistency
stability.
in the policies
Consistent
also.
with the policy. So that is a major difference that you see. And if you look at the two, the trade war itself, you look at the regional tussles between the two, you will see the Chinese being very patient, very calculative, and the Americans, although calculative, you can't say they're not calculative and they're not manipulative, but they are seeking objectives that mostly benefit the next election.
Yeah.
So that is the difference between two
That's
policies.
why, whenever we talk about the US aggression regarding Iran for that matter, and we always think that, Donald Trump has to also compete in the next election. So what sort of an implication would it have? We never talk about the Chinese elections. Have we ever?
So here's the leadership that
there are
is
multiple
not,
reasons for that also.
here's a leadership that is not so much worried about re-election, and here's a leadership that is not sure of support of his own party or its own
Exactly,
voter
and there-
base. So that's the major difference that you see in the policies being enacted.
The problem is that if you remember when Prime Minister Imran Khan was, since he's going to go and visit America, and yesterday there was this news that they'll be meeting on the 22nd. And One day, exactly one day before that, I mean, the White House, I mean, obviously they issued the statement, but the State Department had no clue about the visit. I mean, one of the questions was also put to the spokesperson, but they had no idea what to talk about. Now, sir, another very important factor, that is about the SCO, because that is something where you see major countries of Asia getting together, whether you talk about the Central Asian states or Russia or China or Pakistan or India for that matter, and other observer states like Afghanistan, like Iran, like Mongolia, Belarus, I mean, the name which I forgot earlier. And you're talking about Turkey, you're talking about Sri Lanka now, you are expanding. So that means that a lot of interest of those countries which are with China primarily will benefit in the long run, sir. So role of SCO and also the foreign policy of the Chinese and its implications, the closer they get to the Iranians, sir, what sort of Middle Eastern policy will they adopt, considering Saudi Arabia and UAE for that matter, sir?
Well, with regard to the SCO, if you look at the last couple of summits, and the last summit was held in Kyrgyzstan, in Bishkek, which was also attended by our Prime Minister, the declarations are very clear. They have identified a couple of common challenges, terrorism in all its form being the most important one, and then the connectivity is the second most important aspect, and the third is the fight against poverty and the developmental challenges. These are the three broad goals on which all the members of the SCO they agree on. Now, if you look at these challenges, these are the challenges which are faced by all countries, and the Chinese are trying to unite. Even when India and Pakistan have their wars and they have their differences, but when it comes to SCO, the joint exercises that are organized under the auspices of the SCO, they are regularly attended by the
Pakistani as well as the Indian,
as well as the
last time
Indian.
I think they were held in Russia, if I'm not wrong, sir.
So this is the mechanism that the Chinese are using, but and SCO, if you look at its population, look at its size, look at the countries that are represented in it.
More than half of the population,
more
sir.
than half of the world's population lives lives within the SCO region. So SCO is a very important, but the Chinese are very clever or very smart or very shrewd, that they are using SCO as a multilateral forum to deal with even the issues which are somewhat bilateral in nature. For example, they have taken a specific stand on the GCPO. The GCPO, the Joint Comprehensive Action Plan Agreement, does not fall within the ambit of the SCO discussion, but they have taken a position on it that we do not want the Americans, we do not accept America's willingness to withdraw from GCPO. So which means that the GCPO agreement, along with Russia and P5 countries minus United States, has to be maintained, has to be kept intact. So which essentially means that they are using SCO as a platform to lend support to China's interests in Iran. That's one. And the other, of course, is the question of Afghanistan. On the issue of peace in Afghanistan, the Chinese have held intra-Afghan dialogue meetings on their soil, and so have the Russians, so has Pakistanis, and the latest round of discussion took place in Doha. So Chinese have been very, very vocal and very, very assertive and very, very deeply engaged in this process to bring peace to Afghanistan. So in other words, the Chinese interests are essentially developmental and peace oriented, and the one thing which stands out very important is that China does not accept America's definition of it as the strategic competitor of United States. If you look at the June 1st, 2019 document announced by the Pentagon, which is known as the new Indo-Pacific strategy of the Americans, in which they clearly recognize and they describe in that many words that China is a strategic competitor and US is concerned about the growing influence of China, not
But the kind
in
of
the
advancement the
neighboring
Americans
region.
have made in technology and education and otherwise, sir, they definitely they have an edge over the Chinese.
But
So is it only the exports or the money or the trade? What exactly is the bigger threat for the Americans?
well,
by the Chinese?
the Americans are concerned about the rise of China because they think that they have beaten.
As an adversary, sir?
Yeah, exactly.
Economic adversary and Russia
Economic,
as a
no,
military adversary.
not only as an economic adversary, but as a strategic competitor. That the only country which is quite capable of displacing US growing influence in the world or US entrenched position in the world is China. So they perceive China as a threat, and they describe China's peaceful rise more as a China threat theory. But the Chinese do not buy this line because they think that their program or their rise, their peaceful economic rise is going to benefit all, and it is up to the Americans whether they want to support CPEC or or it's up to the Indians whether they want to support CPEC. But Chinese are pursuing an inclusive strategy. So which means that they are trying to extend the benefits of CPEC or the One Belt One Road initiative in the larger context of expanding their influence. And that is what worries the United States the most. And the Americans in their latest defense strategy that I mentioned have laid down the gauntlet for the Chinese, and they have described China China is not only a competitor but it's also an adversary, and hence they are counting on the support of their allies, which includes China, which includes Japan, Australia and India as their strategic partners to contain the rising influence of China. So as far as the Chinese are concerned, the Americans have made it clear that they are the rising power, and hence the Americans feel threatened by them. And in that context, they are doing everything possible to reduce the Chinese influence in this area, and that's why the one instrument of that is the potential trade war.
Potential trade war. Now, sir, the influence of the Chinese, I mean, over the last 20 years or so, it has increased. Obviously, at that time, we were talking about the Chinese investments in their western part. And once I remember, there was a story that they invested $25 billion and they're shifting their industry. Obviously, they had something in their mind, and I mean, it was supposed to happen someday. Now, sir, looking at the potential of SCO and looking at the kind of engagement of the Chinese, sir, and the kind of influence they have over the other countries, do you think, sir, in the future, that day is pretty near when Chinese would practically sort of start vetoing the decisions taken by the Americans openly and strongly? I'm not talking about the typical diplomatic tone, sir, that we condemn this. No, sir. We will not let it happen. Something like what Vladimir Putin always ends up saying, sir.
I think that time is not very far away. Chinese are very smart people, as said by Dr. Rifat. They move in a very planned way. What they have done in moving towards the warm water, the way they have done it is very interesting, that America does not have a reason to stop them. And though America must be desperate to stop them from building this CPEC structure, but America cannot do anything. So this is the way Chinese move on. And then, as mentioned by Dr. Rizvi, that when China does something, it does with getting all people together. It does not offend anybody. So much so that at this time, China is not offending India, although India is against CPEC, but you will not hear anything from China that China is unhappy with
The regular
India.
business is still on.
Yes.
Yeah.
Iran and India got together in Chabahar port. They did everything. India has spent a lot of money there, but China did not say anything. China rather said that, okay, this is also, we can join hands in this venture also. So this is going. Now we don't know that when that time will come when China will just open up against United States. So far in this tense period between United States and China, although Trump is tense, but China does not look tense. It's very comfortable and sort of playing the role of a big brother that, okay, we will do something. So I think that the time is close, but we cannot say when it happens. China will become very strong. Once China's influence spreads over the Middle East and the East Africa and all this region, then it will be very difficult for the United States to stop China from anything.
One very small
Quick comments
intervention.
over to you.
The Chinese definition of a comprehensive power is by that they will reach that comprehensive power by 2030. So till 2030, they will not engage in any kind of a confrontation with their neighbors. Ji.
AVM sir.
Two things. China has shown its resolve to stand up to the American excesses by increasing tariffs on $110 billion worth of imports that it does from America. Remember, China has a total of $120 billion imports against $540 of USA. So there's a trade deficit, trade gap of about $420 billion between the two nations. But China has, whereas America has only increased tariffs on less than 50% of their imports, China has almost increased tariffs on 95% of their imports from USA. So they have stood up to the
These were
pressure.
the retaliatory measures.
Retaliatory
right, sir?
measures.
So,
But at the same time, China has also very categorically indicated it does not want a military conflict with the United States. It is not its interest. And let me tell you, China has progressed so far in the shadow of war on terrorism, where the American and its allies concentration or focus was on Muslim and Islam as a threat, and they probably did not put so much of attention on China. And China had a very quiet growth period of 20 years, where its growth is averaging around more than 8%.
smooth and silent walkover.
Yes. So now that so-called threat of the or Islamophobia has died down or has reduced, not really died down, their attention, they need a threat, they need an enemy, and now that is why in the last 3-4 years the concept of China as a strategic competitor has emerged. So that is where, but Chinese are seeing their Achilles heels in South China Sea. They know that that's the area that they are most vulnerable. So they do not want, at the moment, there's no doubt in their mind that technologically they are still decades behind USA, and probably they would not need decades to catch up, but probably they will need just a decade to catch up on the Americans, particularly in the domain of space warfare, where Chinese are investing very heavily, more than their aviation industry. I think Chinese are investing more on two future war zones.
Space technology?
The space technology and cyber warfare. I think these are two the future battle zones or future war zones between the countries. And if you recall, after Iran shot down the American drone, the Americans replied in a cyberspace attack on the Iranians' air defense systems. So that is the nature of changing nature of war that you are witnessing today in the coming probably decade, and that is where the Chinese are investing. And let's not forget the Huawei episode.
Yeah, 5G.
Where the 5G, and they have suddenly emerged as the leading nation in the 5G connectivity and mobility warfare. So that is where that has taken back the Americans and others by certain progress that they have made, and they actually caught the European market as well, and as well as the North America. That they were trying to get into the 5G contracts with Canada and Europe. Probably they are in very forward stage of their negotiations with France. So these are the areas which seemingly are non military areas, But these are the future battle zones where the Chinese are putting their maximum attention, and also the economic side. Let's not forget that 1.2 trillion of the US securities, the government securities, are held by the Chinese.
All right.
And that's a potential weapon that the Chinese...
So they have, look at their investments. I mean, look at the Japanese investments for that matter. So I was told that we are just, I don't even have one more minute, but a quick comment, because this is really something important I want to talk about. It says Beijing may have pledges supposed to Tehran, but it cannot take chances where its major trading partner Saudi Arabia is concerned. Quick comment on that, sir.
Well, I think that's the balancing act that the Chinese have to perform. They want to have best of both the worlds. They want to maintain very good relationship with Saudi Arabia, but at the same time would not like that relationship would develop at the cost of Tehran. So, but then they have to balance and the Chinese diplomacy is at its finest when it comes to choosing between the two sides. So they would like to maintain good relationship with both the countries. And absolutely finally, my final comment is that one area where the Chinese have beaten the Americans hands down is the artificial intelligence. So we do not have time to talk about it, but at some point...
That's a very important area. So, quick comment and over to AVM Saab.
Yes, I think when this CPEC project will be completed, I think the tension between between Iran and Saudi Arabia will also dilute, because America is playing a great role in creating tension.
But they have historical issues as well, sir. I mean, if you go into the details...
That's right, that we know very well. But America, as Eisenhower once said, that this military-industrial complex will put you into troubles one day. So now America, a big lobby of America is associated with this military-industrial complex, and they want to sell their arms. As I said in another previous program, that they build a bomb in 12 minutes, and they want that bomb to be thrown somewhere in 12 minutes because they cannot pile them up. So they have sold arms to Saudi Arabia quite recently, and they want to sell more. And this tension is required for such deals. So when when things will change and when this China will come to this region, China will have different approaches about these things.
AVM Saab, so
China is pragmatic because it has its own image in its mind in coming 10 years. So it's pragmatic, it's about its relationship with the countries in its neighborhood. And probably that's why it's not going to... China probably has a larger stake in Iran as far as CPEC is concerned, but China also has a larger stake in the Saudi Arabian oil as far as the oil remains an important factor. But probably after that, when the oil loses its shine, Saudi Arabia and other countries may also lose their importance in the eyes of the Chinese leadership. But Iran would
they'll also lose their charm.
Yeah, so the Iranians would remain important because they are going to be an important part of CPEC as the Iranians envision. So I think they're not dogmatic about at this moment. They're going to confront USA on Iran, but probably they're going to side with Moscow's stance on Iran. So that would be an anti-US stance, but they would be probably siding with the Moscow.
Oh, well, I think Moscow is pretty vocal and loud, whereas Chinese, I mean, they are great observers.
A larger battle will be fought in UN. That is probably where the combined stance...
It is going to be the next battleground for the diplomats. Anyway, sir, thank you very much, Dr. Saab.
Thank you.
It was a pleasure. Thank you so much, AVM Saab. And that's all we have for this week. I'll see you, inshallah, on Monday. Till then, you take good care of yourself. Khuda Hafiz.